Hello there. Tonight we are going to follow the footsteps of a medieval street vendor as he stirs to life in the freezing dark. His fingers stiff from sleep, his stomach already aching, and the air thick with smoke and stale piss. You're about to hear the kind of story that won't be found in royal scrolls or golden manuscripts. It's not about kings or conquest or castles. It's about a man named Thomas. And if you woke up in his world with his problems and his prospects, you probably wouldn't survive 3 days. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And while you're settling in, post in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now for you. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. Thomas rises well before the sun. He always does. His body wakes him out of habit now the same way his joints ache from years of bending, and his nose twitches for the scent of smoke that means the fire's gone out again. The hearth glows faintly in the dark, holding onto its last coals like a dying man clutching his final breath. He moves quietly, careful not to wake his wife Agnes or the 3 small children curled like cats in the corner. Their shapes are barely distinguishable in the half-light, each wrapped in scraps of fabric and straw, snoring faintly under the weight of exhaustion more than comfort. The bread he bakes won't win awards. It's heavy, it's coarse, it's rough as riverstone, and dark as the underbelly of an ox. He mixes what flour he has, mostly rye, some barley, then reaches for the bin of other things. This is the box that would horrify a modern bakery inspector. Sawdust, crushed acorns, ground chalk, when he has it. And once, only once, he used shavings from boiled leather. Not because he wanted to, but because otherwise they would have starved that week. Historians still debate whether the average medieval peasant knew how dangerous some of these additives were. But in truth, Thomas didn't care. He couldn't afford to. The dough is tough under his hands, not soft and pliant like Agnes's skin had once been when they were newly married. No, this dough fights back. It resists him. But eventually, with enough kneading, it submits. He shapes it into stubby, heavy loaves, fewer than yesterday. The flour bin didn't stretch as far this time. It never does. The oven, if you can call it that, is nothing more than a stone dome carved into the back wall of their dwelling. A fire roars briefly, fed with twigs and dung, until the heat climbs enough to bake the loaves through without burning them completely. The smell fills the room. To us it might seem comforting. To Thomas it smells like pressure. He doesn't eat any of the bread. That would be foolish. He's learned to go without. Instead, he wraps each loaf in a worn cloth, stacks them in a hand-carved wooden tray that he slings across his back, and prepares for the morning battle, selling enough bread to make it to tomorrow. Outside, the sky is still black. Only the faintest hint of grey stains the eastern horizon. But already the streets are waking. A dog barks. A baby cries from some window. A pot clatters onto cobblestone. And someone, a woman's voice, already shouting about fresh turnips, though nobody's buying yet. The mud on the road has frozen overnight. His boots crunch with each step. He'll have to move carefully to keep from slipping. A fall doesn't just mean pain. It could mean cracked ribs, a ruined tray, broken bread. And broken bread doesn't sell. Not in this city. Not in this century. His path to the market winds through alleys still steaming with the residue of yesterday's filth. Medieval cities had no sanitation. None. People threw waste, human and animal, straight into the street. So imagine walking to work with raw sewage underfoot and rats the size of house cats darting past your ankles. Now imagine doing it with a sack of bread on your back that must stay clean, dry and sellable. You get the idea. Thomas doesn't look up much. He knows better. There are thieves in the early dark, and guards, and worse, richer merchants who look at men like him with disdain. He walks fast, keeps his eyes on the ground, counts his steps, avoids puddles, avoids the corners where drunks still sleep, avoids the churchyard where someone's body was dumped just 2 days ago, no one asked whose. The market is still mostly quiet when he arrives. But he isn't alone. Other vendors are already setting up, some with carts, some with nothing more than a rag on the ground. There's the old woman who sells pig trotters and dried onions, the one-eyed man with his barrel of pickled fish, and the boy who offers buttons, though no one remembers who gave them to him. Thomas nods to them, but says nothing. They're not friends, they're competition. He claims his usual patch near the south wall. It's not ideal, but it's shaded from the sun, important when bread goes stale in under 2 hours, and it's near the tannery which smells like death, but the butchers walk by often. They have coin. It's the best spot he can afford to lose. One loaf goes to the ground already. He dropped it fumbling with the cloth. He curses silently and kicks it toward the wall. Maybe a dog will take it. Maybe a child. Either way, it's unsellable now. That's one less mouth fed tonight. He adjusts the others in the tray, makes them look more full than they are. A trick of positioning. That's half the job illusion. Making poverty look like sufficiency. Making stale look fresh. Making desperation look like determination. He clears his throat and calls out the same thing he shouted every day for 15 years. Bread, hot bread. Good for stew, good for soup. Bread for your breakfast. Feed your house. A woman walks past, glances, then shakes her head. He doesn't stop. He can't. This is Thomas. This is the start of his day, and there are still 12 hours left to go. Agnes doesn't get to rest just because she doesn't walk the market stalls. Her labor begins the moment Thomas leaves and doesn't stop until long after dark. Theirs is not a household with idle hands. Every person who can move is expected to help, even the smallest among them. Their home, if you want to call it that, is a single room with a sagging ceiling and cracked stone floor. One window, no glass, just a wooden shutter that lets in cold air and pigeons depending on the season. The family sleeps on a mound of old straw that is rotated once a month and shaken free of bugs only when absolutely necessary, which, as you might guess, is not often. Agnes is 33 but looks well over 40. Her hair is mostly hidden beneath a ragged linen cap, but streaks of white have begun to show at her temples. Her hands roughened by wool earth and soapless water are always busy. She doesn't walk the streets shouting for buyers, but she holds the house together thread by painful thread. Today, like every day, she begins by checking the chickens. They have 3. None are fat. The scrawniest is named Hope, which says more about Agnes's humor than her expectations. The birds lay irregularly and eggs are too valuable to eat. Each one must be kept clean packed in straw and sold to a tavern near the city gate before they crack or spoil. Next comes the garden. It's not much, just a few rows of vegetables in the patch of dirt behind their home. The soil is poor, the sun unpredictable. Still, Agnes coaxes out some carrots, leeks, and cabbage in the warmer months. In winter, the ground is as frozen as the bread crusts the children gnaw before bed. She's also been trying to grow mint something to mask the taste of spoiled meat or stew. It hasn't taken yet. The rats enjoy it more than they do. When she's not outside, she's spinning. By candlelight, by sliver of daylight, by sheer force of will. The wool she spins is coarse and uneven. She uses a drop spindle because they can't afford a wheel, and her thread is often rejected by the cloth merchants for being too rough or not fine enough for good cloth. Still, some will buy it for a low price, of course. Just enough to keep candles burning, just enough to keep spinning. And then there are the children. Edmund is 10. He's already more adult than child. He helps Thomas in the mornings, carrying the bread tray or acting as lookout in case a guard approaches. He's good at watching the corners, good at pretending not to be afraid. The 2 girls, Isabel and Mary, are 7 and 5. They stay with Agnes. Their jobs are small but vital, collecting dry dung and wood scraps for fuel, shaking the straw to find lice before bedtime, chasing chickens back to their pen when they escape into the alley. Mary sometimes talks to them like they're her sisters. It's unclear whether she's pretending or just lonely. There is no school, no reading, no writing, no numbers beyond what's needed to count eggs or measure a handful of grain. Historians still debate whether medieval working-class children were truly childlike in the way we understand the word. Evidence suggests their childhoods were shorter, their innocence brief. For Agnes's children, there's no debate at all. She does try to teach them things. How to tell a customer's mood from their walk, how to speak humbly to a merchant and fiercely to a thief, how to identify spoiled food by its smell before it turns their stomach inside out. Important lessons, necessary ones. Agnes doesn't waste time wishing for more. But sometimes when the sun sets just right behind the slanted rooftops, she does remember the brief months when she was newly married, when Thomas still joked, when they still had 5 children, not just 3. One died in his sleep before his 2nd birthday. Fever. The other simply stopped eating one winter and never started again. They buried both behind the old church in unmarked graves where no flowers grow because the soil is too cold. Still Agnes spins. Still she feeds the chickens. Still she sells the eggs. Sometimes when she walks the length of the alley to deliver her thread or trade her vegetables, she passes the homes of people with more light, more food, more warmth, and she wonders what it must feel like to go a single day without worry. But then she hears the shriek of a neighbor, the slap of a husband's anger, the crying child just one wall away, and she remembers everyone's struggles, just in different shoes. Tonight when Thomas returns, they'll count coins together, whispering, children pretending to sleep, one hand holding the candle, one hand counting crumbs. If it was a good day, maybe they'll have stew. If not, they'll break off pieces of the hardest bread and pretend it's enough. Agnes doesn't cry anymore. She did once, but it got in the way of the spinning. By the time the sun properly rises, the medieval city Thomas calls home has come alive, but not in a way you'd want to experience firsthand. The streets are nothing like the cobbled lanes of a romantic period film. They're more like obstacle courses designed to punish the soles of your feet and your nose. The path Thomas walks every day is a shifting minefield of animal droppings, human waste, broken pottery mud, and the occasional sleeping drunk who hasn't moved since last night's fight. There is no sanitation department, no garbage collection, no sewers, no fresh air unless you count the draft blowing through an alley that smells like dead pigs and wet ash. Medieval cities weren't just dirty, they were experiments in how many different types of filth could exist in one place at once. It's said that people would dump their chamber pots directly into the street below, with a quick shout, "Gaudy loo." If you were in Edinburgh, for example, and if you didn't move fast, you'd wear someone else's dinner from the night before. And poor Thomas has to navigate this landscape with a tray of bread strapped across his back, carefully balanced, hoping none of it falls into the muck. The ground is sticky in places, slippery in others. The car tracks from wealthier merchants have cut deep ruts in the earth now filled with standing water from last night's rain. His boots are already soaked. He walks fast not because he's late, but because the longer he stays still in this place, the more likely he is to draw unwanted attention. As he rounds the corner into the southern square, more dirt than stone, he spots the usual chaos. Dozens of other vendors, all poor, all hungry, all desperate. Each one has something to sell: old apples, dried herring onions so soft they melt under your thumb. A woman's table is stacked with chipped cups and spoons. Next to her, a man waves dried herbs, shouting about cures for coughing and nosebleeds. No one trusts anyone here. The competition is fierce and often violent. There are no permits, no assigned stalls, no first-come, first-served politeness. You stand where you can and hope you're not standing where someone stronger wants to be. Thomas is not a big man. He's not old yet, but years of malnutrition have left him wiry, hunched, and a little bow-legged from carrying weight unevenly. He knows better than to claim a central space where the real action is. Those are for the loudest voices, the meanest elbows, and the fastest fists. Instead, he skirts the edge of the market, positioning himself near the broken water trough, where people occasionally stop to wash turnips or their hands. It's a fair spot, enough foot traffic to stay visible, far enough from the main cluster to avoid being shoved aside. Still, every minute that passes is a risk. On time last winter, a boy with no shoes and no name lunged at his tray and grabbed 2 loaves before disappearing into the alley. Thomas chased him but slipped in something foul and cracked a rib on a stone wall. He couldn't work for 3 days. the family nearly starved. Another time, a competing bread seller accused him of undercutting prices. It turned into a shoving match. Neither of them won. Both were driven off by the market bailiff and had to pay a fine just for shouting. Thomas hadn't shouted, but his word meant nothing against a man with better teeth and a cleaner shirt. Historians still debate whether street markets like these had any effective regulation at all. Some cities claimed they did, issuing decrees and ordinances about pricing and placement, but in practice those rules were tools for bribery, not protection. Street vendors were seen as a nuisance clutter. They weren't part of the guilds. They didn't own shops. They weren't taxpayers in the way the city cared about. To the officials, they were walking problems, potential thieves, spreaders of disease, disruptors of order. The guilds, meanwhile, hated them. Guild bakers controlled who could sell bread, how much, and for what price. A man like Thomas, selling directly to the public without guild permission, he was a parasite in their eyes. Never mind that his customers were the ones who couldn't afford the guild's prices. And so he sells quietly, carefully, eyes open, back turned to the wall so no one can sneak behind him. A woman approaches. She eyes the bread, presses a thumb into the crust. It's firmer than she wants. How long ago was it baked, she asks. This morning, Thomas replies. She sniffs. Feels like yesterday. Thomas stays polite. It was a cold bake. Took longer in the oven. That's all. She looks unconvinced, but she's hungry. She tosses him a coin that's been worn thin, and he hands over a loaf. It's a small victory, but enough to ease his shoulders slightly. 1 down, 11 to go. Every transaction is like this. Questions, inspections, haggling, suspicion. Most customers are poor themselves and just as desperate not to be cheated. Others try to trick him, offering coins that are clipped or bent, or they claim they paid when they didn't. One man even tried to claim Thomas gave him spoiled bread, shouted it in front of a cluster of buyers until Thomas offered him another loaf just to shut him up. It worked, but the crowd thinned afterward. Bread, it seems, is only as valuable as your reputation. And let's say it's a work in progress. By mid-morning, the street is alive with noise. Bells ring from the nearby church. A cart crashes into a post. Children chase each other around the vendor stalls, ducking under tables, ignoring the shouted warnings of adults. Someone drops a bucket. Someone else shouts about fresh eels. A drunk stumbles into Thomas's tray and knocks 2 loaves onto the ground. One is salvageable, the other isn't. He sighs, repositions the rest, keeps selling. Time ticks slowly in the marketplace. There are no clocks. Only the changing of light and the aching of limbs. You sell until you can't, or until there's nothing left to sell. Thomas knows he won't sell everything today. He never does. Some loaves will go stale by dusk. He might try to trade them for old apples, or offer them at half price near the alley taverns where drunk men will buy anything. Sometimes Agnes uses the stale bread to thicken stew. Sometimes the chickens get it. Sometimes it just molds and crumbles and they throw it into the river. By early afternoon, he has 3 loaves left. His knees hurt. His fingers are numb. A blister is forming near the strap on his shoulder. He wants to sit, but he can't afford to look idle. Idleness invites inspection, and inspection invites trouble. He adjusts his cap, pulls the cloth tighter around the bread, pretends not to hear the guild baker 3 stalls over muttering about illegal competition. The wind picks up. A gust blows dust into his face and the loaves. He curses under his breath, wipes them with his sleeve. The woman walking past doesn't notice or pretends not to. Another hour, maybe 2. Then he'll pack up, count his coins, head home. If he's lucky, he'll have enough for more flour. If not, well, they've had worse days, and he'll still be back here tomorrow. Because what choice does he have? The best-selling spot in the market isn't a place. It's a prize. And every morning it has to be fought for like a bone among dogs. You might think that a street corner or patch of cobblestone would be just that public space. But in the marketplace of a medieval city, every foot of ground is a battleground, and territory is claimed not by right, but by ritual, seniority, bribery, or brute force. Sometimes all 4. Thomas knows exactly which spot he wants. just a few paces from the corner where two alleyways meet and foot traffic pours in from both sides. On holy days, that corner sees twice the customers, and on regular market mornings, the shade it provides helps preserve his bread longer. But he also knows that Roderick the pickle man has had his eye on that same corner for weeks. Roderick is bigger than Thomas. Much bigger. His arms are thick from hauling barrels of brine and cabbage, and his scowl is known across 3 parishes. Last week, he told Thomas flat out, "Try and stand there again, and I'll turn your bones into soup." Thomas thought he was joking until he saw the scar along Roderick's forearm, and remembered the rumors that he once beat a rival fishmonger with a ladle. But today Thomas arrives earlier than usual, and the corner is empty. His heart leaps. He moves toward it, sets down his tray, straightens the loaves, adjusts the cloth, feels the rising thrill of good fortune. And then he hears it. Heavy steps, muffled curses, the slosh of brine. Roderick. Thomas the man grunts coming up beside him like a cart with no brakes. "You lost." Thomas shakes his head. "No. Been here since first bell. It's open ground." "Is it?" Roderick leans over, breath reeking of garlic and vinegar. "Funny, because I don't remember you asking." There's a pause. Tension tightens the air. A few other vendors glance over but look away quickly. No one wants to get involved. Thomas doesn't move, doesn't blink, just says, "It's one day. You take it tomorrow." Roderick snorts. "You offering me a deal? I'm offering to not make this worse than it has to be." Historians still debate whether informal agreements like these actually stabilize vendor hierarchies or just delayed fights. But in this case, the moment passes. Roderick scowls, spits, then mutters, "Fine, but don't get comfortable." And just like that, Thomas has won the morning. But that doesn't mean he gets to rest. Securing the spot is only the beginning. Now comes the second battle attention. Street vending in a medieval city is part commerce, part theater. Everyone's yelling, everyone's selling, and customers, bless them, treat the market like a game show. Who will give the best deal? Who's most desperate, who looks like they won't fight back if I haggle them down to crumbs? Thomas raises his voice. Hot bread baked at dawn, rye barley, and belly filling. His throat already hurts. His lips are dry. He should have drunk more water before leaving. But water from the communal barrel tastes like rusty spoons and frog spit, so he skipped it. A customer approaches a man in a dark cloak, maybe a clerk, maybe a monk. Hard to say. He eyes the bread, picks up a loaf, sniffs it. "This has sawdust," the man says. Thomas shrugs. "So does half the bread in this market. It keeps better." The man stares at him, then at the loaf. Then oddly he smiles. Fair enough. He pays. Thomas exhales. Victory. Of a sort. Next to him, another vendor. Helena, the apple girl, starts shouting louder. "Sweet fruit. No worms this time." Customer's turn. Thomas watches 2 veer away from him and toward her. He clenches his jaw. Competition among vendors is rarely polite. It's not unusual for rival sellers to undercut each other in real time. One woman will call out her price and another will immediately slash hers by a penny. Some vendors lie outright, claiming their fish is fresh from the sea when it's been sitting in salt for 3 days. Others go further, spreading rumors that rivals have spoiled goods or sick families. Last year, someone accused Thomas of baking with diseased grain. He lost a week's worth of sales before he could clear his name. The accuser never admitted it, but Thomas saw the same man selling bread in his spot the very next day. Every corner of the market holds its own dangers. There are the regular thieves, young, fast, and clever. They swipe coins when change is given. They lift loaves when your back is turned. Some come with children in tow to act as distractions. There are the city watchmen who aren't thieves, not exactly, but still find ways to empty your pockets. They'll inspect your stall. Frown. Declare that your bread is unsanctioned or underweight. Then offer to overlook the violation for a few coins. And there are the guild enforcers, the worst of the lot. Big men with lists of approved sellers, all of them backed by powerful bakers who don't appreciate competition. Guild rules forbid non-members from selling bread inside market bounds, but the rules change by the hour. Sometimes they demand fines. Sometimes they break a few loaves for inspection. Sometimes they simply overturn your tray and walk away. Thomas once tried to argue with one. Once. Now, When he sees a guild badge, he lowers his eyes and waits to be noticed or ignored. Today he's lucky. The enforcers are busy elsewhere. By midday, the sun is overhead, the market is at its loudest, and Thomas's back is screaming from the weight of the tray. He's down to 4 loaves. Not bad, not great. He watches Helena toss a half-rotted apple at a dog. She smiles at him. He smiles back. She's missing 2 teeth now, and one eye's gone lazy. But she's sharp as ever. Good spot today, she calls. He nods. You'll get it next time. She shrugs. If it doesn't rain. A gust of wind kicks up dust. It stings his eyes. He blinks. Down the lane, someone screams. A fight. 2 fish vendors again. One shoves the other. The second one slips. Fish spill across the stones. The crowd surges forward, not to help but to grab what they can. The guards don't move. Thomas turns away, focuses on his loaves. There's a saying among vendors. Don't count on bread until it's in your pouch. Today he's hoping for 6 pence total. Enough for more flour, a bit of barley, maybe a turnip or 2. He dreams of chicken roasted, steaming skin, blistered and crisp, but it's just a dream. Instead, he adjusts the tray, resets the cloth and calls out again. Bread, hot bread. 3 left, don't wait. Another hour passes, another coin earned, another wrinkle in his brow. And still he stands his ground. By the time the afternoon shadows begin to stretch long across the market stones, the game changes not because the hunger goes away, but because the rules get meaner. Morning buyers are, if not cheerful, at least tolerable, but those who arrive afternoon are weary, suspicious, and irritated. They've already seen the stalls, heard the pitches, haggled down one poor soul, and left 3 others scowling. If they haven't bought yet, it's either because they're broke, or they're looking to bleed someone dry for the smallest coin's worth of food. And Thomas, he's right there, square in their path, trying not to look like prey. This is where the third kind of war begins, the war of regulation. It's not loud. It doesn't draw crowds. But it strangles just the same. Street vendors are entangled in an invisible net of laws and taxes that change faster than the clouds over the cathedral dome. What you could sell yesterday might be banned today. And what cost 2 pence this morning might require a permit by evening. Thomas has no permits. He has no guild. He has no protection. What he does have is a memory full of whispered rules, half-heard warnings, and contradictory edicts. Like no bread selling within 5 paces of the fountain on feast days, or only baked goods made with wheat may be sold after the Angelus bell, or street vendors may not block thoroughfares wider than 3 men. He's heard all of them. None are written down. All are enforced sometimes. That's where the market sergeant comes in. A squat man with a hooked nose and boots polished with arrogance, he patrols the square with a list in one hand and a stick in the other. The list, Thomas knows, is blank. Just a prop. The stick, however, is very real. Breadman, the sergeant calls out, catching sight of Thomas. You again. Thomas bows his head, slightly respectful but not groveling. Just trying to earn my way, sir. Didn't you pay last week's corner fee? I did, sir. 3 pence. 3. It should have been 4. Price has changed. Thomas doesn't argue. That would be foolish. He simply reaches into his pouch and withdraws 1 more coin, his last from today's take. He holds it up, then pauses. Unless he says quietly, I've got a loaf going stale, perhaps. The sergeant plucks the coin from his fingers. No bread, he says. I'm watching my figure. He walks off chuckling. Thomas exhales slowly. He's learned how to lose with dignity. Historians still debate whether these daily bribes were officially sanctioned or simply tolerated. In practice, they amounted to the same thing. Every coin Thomas gave the sergeant was 1 less for barley 1 more night scraping the pot clean. Some vendors rebel. A few weeks ago, a man selling cured sausages refused to pay. He claimed he was within his rights, said he'd read the town ordinance, not that he could read. The sergeant took it personally. He returned with 2 guards, overturned the man's table, smashed half the links underfoot, and fined him 10 pence for disruption. The sausage man disappeared the next day. No one asked where he went. It's easy to romanticize rebellion from a distance. But for people like Thomas, resistance rarely ends in triumph. It ends in starvation, arrest, or worse. So he pays. Everyone pays? It's part of the job. The regulations don't stop at bribes. There are limits on pricing too. Bread can only cost so much, and Thomas is supposed to follow. the Assize of Bread, a price control law meant to keep bakers honest and protect the public from overcharging. Except Thomas isn't a guild baker and his bread isn't pure wheat. It's rye barley filler, technically outside the law's scope. Still, that doesn't stop the guild from complaining that he's undercutting. They accuse him of flooding the market with cheap goods, of lowering public trust in bread quality, of causing economic disruption. Economic disruption. A man who walks barefoot half the week baking bread over a dung-fed fire in a room no bigger than a goat pen is apparently disrupting the economy. He tries not to laugh at the absurdity. The guild sends their own inspectors now and then, men in blue sashes with eagle brooches and very soft hands. They don't look at Thomas. They look at his tray. "This is a coarse loaf," one says, poking it like it might bite him. "Yes, sir," Thomas replies. "It's quite small. Flour's dear this week. It smells odd. Kept in cloth to preserve it. Might have picked up a bit of..." They frown, then leave. "No fine, not today, but the message is clear. You're being watched." Back near the fountain, a boy's crying. His tray is empty and his pouch is lighter than it should be. Someone must have stolen from him. No one helps. It's not that people are cruel, it's just that they can't spare the risk. If they step in, they'll miss their own customers, lose their own coin, draw the wrong kind of attention. Thomas watches silently, then turns away. He's done it himself, looked away, more times than he can count. Morality is a luxury when your children need to eat. Sometimes the rules are so contradictory they collapse on themselves. One official says no selling during Mass. Another says you must leave the square by sunset. Mass ends at dusk, so what do? You sell quietly inside the alleys. You hide your tray when bells ring. You pretend to be walking, not trading. It's all theatre. Everyone plays along until someone doesn't, and then there's trouble. Agnes once tried to sell thread outside the cathedral. Just a few spools in a basket near the steps. A priest saw her, accused her of disrupting worship, said her presence invited sin. She was fined a shilling, an impossible sum. They had to sell 2 blankets and half the chickens, one never laid again. After that, she stayed closer to home. Every new holy day brings a fresh set of restrictions. On feast days, certain goods are banned. Others require permits. Some streets are closed. Sometimes they're forced to move entirely only to discover that their new location is already claimed or forbidden. Thomas once spent half a day relocating every hour, hounded by different officials. At the end of it, he'd sold 1 loaf and torn his trousers on a nail. That night, they boiled turnip skins and drank the water. And yet, for all the rules, there's no protection. If a customer cheats him, if someone steals a loaf, if a gang of boys overturns his tray, there's no court to hear his case, no guards to intervene, no recourse. He can try to complain, but the clerk will laugh. One time the clerk asked, "Can you spell your name?" When Thomas said no, the man replied, "Then how would I file the complaint? Justice belongs to the literate. It's not just the law, it's the system. Even the weight measures are rigged." The town scales meant to standardize trade favor the rich. A noble's pound weighs more than a peasant's. Literally. If Thomas tries to measure his flour at the public mill, he's docked an ounce or 2 every time. He knows it. The miller knows it. No one does anything. It's always the same. The system isn't broken, it was built this way. But Thomas keeps going. Because he has to. He memorizes which guards take smaller bribes, which corners are usually ignored, which feast days bring the most lenient patrols. It's a kind of dance-twisting, ducking, sidestepping rules that crush others. He doesn't think of himself as clever, just tired. And tomorrow he'll dance again, because the bread won't bake itself, and the children will be hungry. Again, the market winds down slowly, like a candle burning itself out quietly, unevenly, and with a little smoke. As the sun dips low, casting long golden beams through the dust and grime, some vendors start packing up. The lucky ones are already gone, their goods sold before noon, their pockets heavier than their neighbors'. But Thomas is still there, guarding his final 2 loaves like they're relics from heaven. The trick now is to decide what to do with them. Sell them cheap. Keep them for the family. Try his luck, walking them door to door. He considers his options while the noise around him dwindles. A cart rattles past with the rhythm of a broken wheel. A beggar sings softly from the shade of a torn awning. Somewhere a cat yowls, chasing nothing or everything. This is when the real danger creeps in, because the light is fading, and with it so is order. In the medieval city, as soon as dusk begins to take hold, the guard patrols become infrequent. The guild enforcers disappear. The officials go home. What's left behind are the shadow dwellers, thieves, cut-purses drunkards, and the hungriest poor who've gone past desperation and entered survival mode. Thomas doesn't like being out this late. He shifts his tray, tucks the loaves into the cloth to keep them clean, and begins the walk home. His boots are heavier now, soaked through from the morning slop, and the ache in his lower back feels like it's been hammered into his spine. The alleyways are quieter, but not silent. A boy whistles tunelessly in the distance. A pair of girls giggle somewhere behind a shutter. But behind the quiet, there's something else. A hum of uncertainty. A sense that anything might happen. And that's not just paranoia. He's been robbed before. 3 times in the last 5 years, to be precise. Each time was different. Once by a boy who looked too young to steal. Once by 2 men who cornered him near the well and threatened to break his legs if he didn't hand over his day's earnings. And once by a woman pretending to buy bread who snatched the pouch from under his belt when he leaned forward to make change. There's no consistency. No pattern. That's what makes it worse. Tonight he chooses a different route. He avoids the alley near the dye shop. It always reeks of spoiled indigo and too many secrets. He skips the lane by the bakery that belongs to the guild. Too many guild men, too many hard looks. Instead, he cuts through the weaving district, where most of the workers are still inside. His ears stay sharp. His eyes flick from shadow to shadow. He keeps one hand on the pouch and one hand under the tray. Nothing happens, not tonight. But he knows that means nothing for tomorrow. He reaches his block, just as the light dies completely. Agnes has hung a scrap of tallow-dipped linen near the door, an old trick to help guide him in the dark. It smells faintly of lard and hope. Inside the house is dim but warm. The fire is low but alive. The children sit in a semicircle near the hearth, chewing on something unidentifiable, while Agnes spins with her usual quiet intensity. He doesn't speak right away. Just lowers the tray, unwraps the loaves, and sets them on the bench. He's too tired to count coins, too tired to explain how Roderick almost took his spot, or how the sergeant fined him again, or how the apples next door are starting to smell like vinegar. Agnes doesn't ask. Instead, she gestures toward the pot. Inside thin stew, carrots, maybe cabbage, a little bone. Bread will help thicken it. He tears off the oldest loaf, the one no one would buy, and breaks it into pieces. The girls stir it in. The scent isn't good, but it's better than the smell of the streets. Edmund offers him a chipped cup of warm water. No words, just that, the kindest thing anyone's done all day. They eat in near silence. Every now and then, one of the girls hums softly an old song half forgotten. Thomas leans back against the wall and closes his eyes. He tries to listen, tries to feel like this is enough. But even now the stress gnaws at him. How much flour is left? Is the oven still intact? How many eggs did Agnes sell? Will the fishmonger let him trade again this week? Can they stretch until Sunday? Sleep comes late and unevenly. The straw mat they share is infested with fleas. The baby Mary twitches in her sleep, a soft whimper escaping every few minutes. Thomas lies still, his eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling, replaying the day like a prayer. Sometime after midnight he drifts off, and dreams of bread. In the morning they'll do it all again. In another part of the city, another vendor is waking Margaret the fishmonger. She sleeps in a corner of a shared shed near the edge of the docks. Her mattress is an old fishing net piled with dry leaves. The smell of salt and old scales clings to everything. She wakes to the sound of gulls. Not church bells, not footsteps, just gulls, loud, insistent, hungrier than anyone else in town. Her fish today's catch has to be picked up fast. If she's late, the boats will dock, unload, and sell to someone else, and then she'll have nothing to hawk but the spoiled leftovers from yesterday. No one wants day-old fish, not even the dogs. So Margaret hurries. She splashes cold water on her face, binds her hair, wraps her shawl tight. Her boots are still damp from the day before, but there's no time to dry them. No time for anything. By the time she gets to the wharf, the sun is barely up. The fishermen are already unloading barrels. She approaches one she knows Jonas. Got anything left? He shrugs. Cod, some herring. Price went up. I have 4 pence. He frowns. She waits. Then he relents. Half a basket for 4 pence. Less than she hoped, more than she expected. She thanks him, loads the fish, begins the walk toward the square. It's going to be a warm day. That's bad news, because fish spoils fast, and there's no ice, no salt, just prayer and maybe a sprig of rosemary to trick the nose. She reaches her stall, unloads the fish, begins arranging them so their eyes face up so the smell wafts away, not toward. She whispers under her breath a little chant she learned from her grandmother. God keep it fresh till noon. Some people believe in miracles. Margaret believes in timing. By 9, the first flies arrive. By 10, so do the customers. And by 11, her fingers are slick with fish oil, her apron stained, her voice hoarse. But she's still standing, because what else would she do? The bread won't bake itself. The fish won't sell itself. And the city never stops. Not for people like Margaret. Not for people like Thomas. Not for anyone whose survival depends on a tray, a basket, or a shouted promise into the wind. Sleep doesn't mean peace for people like Thomas and Margaret. When they close their eyes at night, if they're lucky enough to sleep at all, it's not dreams of warm fires or laughter by the hearth that fill their heads. It's worries, calculations, quiet panic. How many eggs did the chickens lay? Did the guard recognize me? Will the bread keep one more day? These are the questions that rock them to sleep like lullabies with teeth. The medieval street vendor doesn't wake up each day with a full tank of energy. They wake up halfway exhausted, aching before their feet touch the cold floor. No gentle stretches, no quiet breakfast nooks, just the awareness of another 12 hours of walking, shouting, lifting, dodging, and praying. And sometimes they wake up sick. This morning Thomas feels it the moment he blinks into the grey dawn. A scratch in his throat, a dull heat behind his eyes, his joints stiffer than usual, his lungs tight with something unwelcome. Not a cold exactly. Not yet. But something is brewing. He doesn't say anything. What's the point? He gets up, stokes the fire, and begins the bread. There's no time for weakness. No room for taking it easy. If he stays in bed, they don't eat. Period. He works slower today, hands heavier than usual. The dough fights him more. The oven takes longer to heat. Agnes doesn't say a word, but she notices. The slight hitch in his step. The extra sweat on his brow. She brings him water without being asked. Warm, slightly bitter. Something from the herb garden. She doesn't say what's in it. It won't help much, but the gesture matters. At the market, the air is thick. Not just with scent, but with tension. A new edict was posted on the church door yesterday, something about licensing bread sellers within city bounds. The guilds must have pushed it through. Most vendors can't read, but word spreads faster than ink. Thomas hears it from Helena first. They're cracking down today, she whispers without looking up from her stack of bruised pears. Cracking down how? Inspections, fines, they want names. Thomas swallows hard. His name is not on any list. His loaves are not certified, and his tray is not official. He considers leaving. Just for the day, staying home. Spinning thread with Agnes, boiling carrots, lying down just once. But he's already here. The bread is already cooling, and the children already hungry. So he stays. He moves his stall back near the alley. Shadows are a poor salesman's friend. He sells quietly. No shouting today. Just a raised eyebrow, a slight nod, a loaf handed over in silence. Business is slower, not just for him. The whole market feels like it's holding its breath. Then comes the shouting. 2 stalls over a young man barely more than a boy is arguing with the inspector. I paid as smart as she saw. The inspector doesn't ask. He flips the man's table. Fruit rolls into the gutter. Pears burst on impact. The boy tries to gather them, but the guard kicks the basket aside. Thomas looks away. So do most others. When the inspectors move on, no one says anything. Silence is the currency of survival. Thomas is lucky. They don't come his way. Maybe they're full. Maybe they're tired. Maybe the shadows protected him again. But even luck has a cost. By the time the sun is overhead, Thomas's head is swimming. The heat, the sickness, the noise, it's too much. He leans on a wall, closes his eyes for a second too long, and nearly drops his tray. A woman catches it before it hits the ground. Careful, she says softly. You all right? He nods, lies, just tired. She doesn't push, just picks out a loaf and hands him a coin, a generous one. She doesn't ask for change. He mumbles thanks. She walks away. He doesn't recognize her, probably never will. But he'll remember that moment for weeks. Kindness is so rare it leaves bruises. By the end of the day, he sold 5 loaves. Not great, not terrible. But the walk home feels 3 times longer than usual. He has to stop twice. Once to cough, once to catch his breath. At home, Agnes doesn't scold. She just guides him to the hearth, sets down his tray, and hands him a mug. Hot, bitter, strong. The children are quiet. They can tell something's wrong. He eats a little stew, lies down early. The straw feels harder than usual. The noises from outside louder, the fire smaller. He dreams of water, flooding the market, washing away the guards, the guilds, the inspectors, leaving only bread floating soft and light. When he wakes, he's drenched in sweat. Margaret isn't doing much better. Her fish went bad today. All of it. The heat came fast, and by the time she made her second sale, the smell had turned from briny to something darker decay dressed in perfume. She tried to mask it. Rosemary, lemon peel. She even splashed a bit of vinegar on the scales. But customers know. They always do. One sniff, one wrinkle of the nose, and the deal's off. She ended up tossing half the basket into the canal. Not because she wanted to, but because keeping it might have made someone sick. That, and she couldn't bear the flies anymore. Now she's sitting by the dock scraping scales off the wood with a butter knife. Not because they're in the way, but because she needs something to do with her hands. She's not sure how she'll afford tomorrow's catch, or if Jonas will even sell to her again. She doesn't cry. Hasn't cried in years. But her throat tightens in that familiar way. That weight behind the eyes, that pull behind the ribs. She tells herself stories to stop the feeling. She imagines a market with shade and ice, where the fish stay fresh and the customers don't haggle, where the guards nod politely and the inspectors carry fruit instead of sticks. She knows it's not real, but it helps. Just a little. She still has her knives, her tray, her basket. Tomorrow maybe she'll try the Eastern Quarter. New faces, new luck. Maybe. That night in homes and sheds and street corners, 100 vendors rest their heads on straw, stone, or sackcloth. Some dream of gold. Some dream of nothing. And some, like Thomas and Margaret, dream of just one day with no sickness, no fines, and enough bread to keep the hunger quiet. Not gone, just quiet. Because that's enough. It has to be. When people think of weather as a nuisance, they think of rain on a vacation or a windstorm that rattles their windows. But for medieval street vendors like Thomas Weather was not a minor annoyance. It was fate. The sky could make or break your entire week, change your income with a gust of wind, and ruin an entire batch of bread with nothing more than a brief summer drizzle. Today the sky can't make up its mind. The morning starts with a strange heaviness. The air is still. The clouds hover like they're deciding whether to cry or sulk. Agnes says her knees hurt, a sure sign rain is coming, and Thomas believes her. Her knees have better foresight than most town officials. But he goes out anyway. The bread is already baked. 12 loaves today, the most he's managed all week. And the flour was fresher. This time he'd bartered with a passing miller for it, trading an old tool Agnes no longer used. He thinks maybe, just maybe, this day will be a good one. He tucks the loaves into cloth, adjusts the strap across his back, and steps outside into a city holding its breath. The streets are quieter than usual. Not silent. Nothing is ever silent here, but dampened somehow. Like even the chickens know to keep their beaks shut. He passes a puddle still clinging to the last rain, brown as broth and twice as thick. A cartwheel is stuck in the muck near the tannery, its driver yelling obscenities at a mule that looks more bored than burdened. As Thomas moves toward the market, the first raindrop hits his forehead, then another, then 10. He picks up his pace. Vendors hate rain more than taxes, because taxes are predictable. Rain ruins everything. By the time he reaches the edge of the square, it's coming down in earnest. Not a downpour. Worse. A slow, steady soak that makes everything damp without being dramatic enough to stop buyers from coming out. He huddles beneath the overhang of an abandoned shop, just enough shelter to protect the loaves for now. A few other vendors are already there, crouching in miserable companionship. Roderick the pickle man is muttering to himself about saintless weather and watching rain drip into one of his barrels. Helena the apple girl is wringing out her apron. A young boy new to the square looks around, clearly realizing he's made a terrible career choice. They don't talk much. What's there to say? Every eye is on the sky, every hand on their goods, every heartbeat wondering, will it stop soon enough to matter? Historians still debate whether medieval marketplaces had any built structures to protect vendors like cloth awnings or wood frame booths. Some cities tried to build them, but most couldn't afford upkeep. The rich had covered stalls. Everyone else, they had hope and some canvas if they were lucky. Thomas has neither. After 20 minutes of rain, he can't wait anymore. He unwraps the bread, lays out 3 loaves on the crate beside him, and begins his call. Bread warm from the hearth. Keep your bellies full and your spirits dry. It sounds more pathetic than persuasive, but he keeps going. A few buyers brave the drizzle. One woman, face half hidden in a shawl, inspects a loaf, frowns, then walks away. Another man buys one, grumbling about the price, but paying anyway. Thomas tucks the coin into his pouch, presses it flat so the moisture doesn't turn it green. The worst part of rain isn't that it ruins the bread, it's that it scares away the maybe buyers. The ones who would have stopped, lingered, considered. The ones who don't need bread right now, but might, if the smell hits them right, or the coin in their pocket feels too heavy. In the rain, those customers vanish. And then there's the real horror wet bread. Once the loaves get damp, they're unsellable. Not just unpleasant, dangerous. The crust cracks, mold blooms faster, people get sick, and if one customer claims your bread made them ill even falsely, you're finished. No one will buy from you again for weeks. Thomas covers the loaves with cloth, shifts under the eave, tries to guess which way the wind will blow next. A gust hits from the east. Just a puff, but it carries rain sideways, and in seconds his tray is soaked. He curses quietly. Not in anger, he doesn't have the energy for that. More like resignation. A man watching a slow leak turn into a flood, knowing he has nothing but his hands to stop it. He pulls the cloth tight again, but it's too late. 2 of the loaves are wet. Not soaked through, but damp. Edges soggy. Unsellable to anyone who isn't starving. He sets them aside. That's dinner then, or tomorrow's chicken feed. The wind shifts again. A neighboring vendor's stand collapses a makeshift canvas tent, giving up under the weight of water. Crates of wilted herbs tumble into the mud. The woman groans. Doesn't bother chasing them, just sits down on the stones, head in her hands. Thomas watches, wants to say something, doesn't. He sells 1 more loaf by early afternoon, then another to a man too drunk to notice it's half damp. Then the rain stops. It's sudden, as if the sky ran out of time. The light returns, not warm but dry. And within minutes, the market begins to move again. More buyers, more vendors shouting, more life. But it's too late. The bread has cooled, lost its freshness, lost its texture. Even the dry loaves now look tired. Thomas forces a smile, raises his voice again. Bread for stew for soup, buy before it's gone. Helena gives him a sympathetic nod. She's sold only half her apples, and now they glisten with a sheen that makes them look bruised. Roderick's pickles are floating in diluted brine. The boy from earlier has disappeared entirely. By sunset, Thomas is down to 3 loaves. He could try the tavern. Sometimes they'll buy old bread for stew, but they'll pay next to nothing, and the owner always demands a cut for doing you the favor. He walks home instead. Agnes doesn't ask how it went. She doesn't have to. She can see it in the way he walks, in the half-empty tray, in the way he sets the bread down like it weighs nothing and everything. She already knows. They eat 1 loaf with broth that tastes more like water than food. The children say nothing. They've learned not to. That night the wind howls. Rain lashes the shutters again. The fire struggles to stay alive. Thomas stares at the ceiling. Every drop sounds like a coin he didn't earn. And he knows that tomorrow might be worse. Or maybe, just maybe it won't. He turns to Agnes. She's already asleep. He closes his eyes and listens to the rain. The only thing more unpredictable than the weather is the people. You'd think the relationship between vendors and customers would be a simple one. One sells, one buys. But in the medieval city where everyone is broke, everyone is suspicious, and everyone is a half step from desperation, The exchange of goods becomes a strange, uneasy dance. Sometimes it's polite, sometimes it's tense, and sometimes it's downright dangerous. Thomas has learned to read faces better than he reads coinage. He knows who will haggle before they open their mouths. He can spot the ones with hidden purses tucked into their sleeves and the ones who clink when they walk because they're carrying every bit of wealth they own. He knows when someone's really hungry and when someone's just enjoying the power of making him squirm. This morning the square is busy, the rain has passed and people are out again, coins burning holes in their pockets after a forced day indoors. Thomas has 7 loaves baked before dawn. Not his best batch. The dough didn't rise quite right, but still good enough for stew or sopping up broth or chewing slowly while staring at the wall. His first customer is an old man. Thin, trembling hands, sharp eyes. He picks up a loaf, weighs it. Feels light, he says. It's fair weight, Thomas replies. Fair for a sparrow, maybe. Thomas forces a laugh. Well, I suppose I bake for sparrows these days. The man doesn't smile. He puts the loaf down. I'll give you a halfpenny. It's a full penny. Not for this, the man says. I know bread. You're cheating. Thomas doesn't answer. He just waits. Eventually, the man walks off. This happens 5 more times before the bell rings for noon. The thing is, Thomas doesn't cheat. Not really, not intentionally. But the flour is what it is. The oven is inconsistent. The portions are by eye, not by scale. Some loaves end up slightly smaller, some slightly heavier. But if he sold them by exact weight, he'd never keep up. So he prices by the average. Some customers accept this. Others, especially the ones who feel poor themselves, don't. Because nothing fuels contempt like the suspicion that someone with less power than you might still be trying to trick you. Historians still debate whether medieval customers were more skeptical than modern ones. Some say yes because they lived in a world without regulation, where food could be spoiled, weights rigged, and deals undone in an instant. Others argue people back then had more trust because they had to. Thomas is firmly in the everyone's lying always camp. He's been accused of all kinds of nonsense. That his bread contains wood. That he uses grave dirt in his flour. That he bakes on Sundays in defiance of God. Once a woman swore she found a mouse tail baked into the bottom crust. She never produced the tail, of course. But she shouted loud enough that 10 people walked away without buying. He lost nearly half a day's earnings. Since then, he's made a habit of being overly polite. Never raising his voice, always nodding deferentially. Always apologizing for things that aren't his fault. It helps, a little, but not always. Today a man in a blue cloak nicer than most picks up a loaf and sniffs it. This smells sour. It's rye, Thomas explains. Dark grains smell stronger. The man frowns. I don't like rye. Then perhaps barley. They're all the same size. Yes. The man shrugs. I'll take 2, but I only have 3 pence. They're a penny each, sir. The man stares at him, cold. Thomas swallows. I'll take the 3, he says. He hands over the bread, takes the coins, doesn't say a word. Because if he argues, the man might shout. And if he shouts, people will hear. And if people hear, they'll walk. Better to lose a penny than lose the day. Still it burns. By mid-afternoon, his mood has soured. He snaps at the child, who touches the loaves without asking. He ignores Helena when she asks how he's doing. He even mutters something under his breath when the guild enforcers pass by just quiet enough to be safe. The tension builds slowly, like sourdough that's been left too long in the bowl, and then snap. A man pushes past his stall, bumps, the tray sends a loaf tumbling into the dirt. Hey, Thomas shouts. The man turns. What? You knocked my bread. The man shrugs. Shouldn't have put it in the way. Thomas steps forward. You'll pay for it. No, I won't. It's a penny. I don't want it. You ruined it. Then don't sell it. Other vendors are watching now, some laughing quietly, some just waiting to see what happens. The man turns to leave. Thomas grabs his sleeve. It's a mistake. The man spins, shoves him. Thomas stumbles backward, drops another loaf. His tray hits the stones, the bread scatters, mud spatters his apron. And the man walks away. Just like that. No punishment, no consequence. A guard saw, did nothing. Helena hurries over, helps gather the loaves. 2 are ruined, 1 salvageable. She says nothing, but her eyes say everything. Thomas stands there, heart pounding, hands shaking, rage sitting just behind his tongue like a stone he can't swallow. He wants to scream, wants to throw something, wants to chase the man and demand justice. But he knows what that would get him. So he breathes, counts, picks up what's left, rearranges the tray, keeps going. Later, a woman with a baby strapped to her chest buys a loaf and thanks him twice. Later still, a young boy pays with 3 buttons and a promise. Thomas gives him half a loaf anyway, because what else can he do? This is the job. Tomorrow it'll happen again. The insults, the haggling, the accusations, the silent kindnesses, the unexpected gifts. And through it all, Thomas will keep standing. Not because he's brave, not because he's hopeful, but because there's no other way, because the bread has to be sold. And his family has to eat. Some say children are resilient, that they bounce back, that they learn fast, that their minds are flexible enough to survive what would crush an adult. That might be true in stories, but in the narrow alleyways and rotten marketplaces of a medieval city, children don't bounce, they bend, slowly, sharply, permanently. Thomas's son Edmund is only 10, but he already moves like a man twice his age. Not because of the years behind him, but because of the weight he carries each day. Not just the tray he sometimes helps his father lift, but the responsibility pressed into him like wet clay from the moment he could walk. His sisters Mary and Isabel are younger, 5 and 7. Their hands are already cracked from gathering fuel, their knees always dirty, their voices oddly quiet for children. They don't laugh often. They don't cry much either. They've already learned what emotions cost energy, attention, and sometimes a slap from someone who's had too hard a day. Childhood for the vendor's family is a series of practical skills and hard truths. The first truth, everything can be sold. The second, trust is dangerous. The third, people won't be kind unless you make them want to be. Thomas never sat his children down to teach them these things. He didn't have to. The streets are their school, and every day in the market is an advanced lesson. Edmund knows how to look harmless, how to hold his face still and soft, how to widen his eyes when speaking to customers, how to step out of the way of guards and into the shadows when things look tense. He also knows how to lie. Not big lies, not clever ones, just the small, sharp deceptions that keep food on the table. This bread is fresh. We'll be back tomorrow. I saw the inspector go the other way. When Agnes once caught him inventing a story about an imaginary cousin who makes the best pies in town to convince a customer to buy 2 loaves instead of 1, she didn't scold him. She just sighed. Then handed him another coin to buy more thread. Historians still debate how early medieval children began to contribute to family economies. Some say 7, others say 5. In Thomas's house, it's whatever age you stop falling over your own feet. Isabel knows how to pick up spilled flour without losing too much. Mary knows how to calm the chickens when they're startled. They both know how to spot a thief before he makes a move. Street children learn to read faces before they read letters. They learn to tell the difference between a shopper and a pickpocket, between a guard looking for trouble and one looking for coin. They memorize escape routes, hiding places, which stalls might offer shelter when things go bad. Their language is half words, half gestures. A hand behind the back means someone's watching. A finger to the lip means keep still. A glance across the square can mean run now. Thomas never wanted his kids to live this way. He never sat in the corner of the hearth and said, "You'll be dodging city guards before you lose your baby teeth." But the market leaves no room for dreams. It just takes what's available. Once a man told Thomas he was cruel for bringing his son into the square. "You should send him to the church," he said. "Let the priests raise him." Thomas almost laughed. He knew of 2 boys who'd gone that route. One scrubbed floors for a decade before dying of fever. The other ran away and now begs for crusts outside the prison wall. There's no safe path, just different kinds of danger. Edmund prefers to stay close to his father. He watches for trouble, helps carry the tray when his father's hands cramp. He's good at spotting the inspectors from a distance, the way they walk, the cut of their tunics. He's also quick. When things get tense, he can run to warn Helena or Margaret or even Roderick. Some vendors resent him. They see him as a spy or a competitor in miniature. "He's got quicker feet than I do," one old man grumbles. "Takes half my sales without saying a word." Edmund doesn't care. He's not trying to make friends. Though sometimes he does. There's a girl, Sarah, who sells apples with her aunt. She's 9. Always has mud on her chin. They never speak for long, just a few words here and there. But sometimes when the market is quiet and the guards are elsewhere, they trade scraps. A slice of bread for a half-rotten pear. A cracked egg for a broken string of beads. They don't call it love. They don't even call it friendship. It's just survival with a smile. One day, she doesn't show up. No one says why. He asks her aunt, but she only shakes her head. Edmund doesn't ask again. The next week, he finds the string of beads tied to a chicken's leg. He doesn't take it, just leaves it there. He never sees her again. Back home, Agnes tries to protect the girls from the worst of it. She keeps them busy with the garden, with the spinning, with anything that feels quieter than the city outside. But she can't stop the sounds that drift in. Shouting, screaming, the tolling bell when someone is dragged to the stocks. One night, Mary wakes up crying, no words, just sobbing. Agnes holds her, rocks her gently, murmurs old songs under her breath, songs her mother sang before everything went dark. Thomas watches from the hearth, says nothing, feels like a failure. He can't afford innocence, not for them, not even for a day. And yet he teaches them how to laugh when he can. He tells jokes while kneading dough bad ones about monks and goats and missing chickens. He whistles songs with off-key endings, sings nonsense rhymes that make them groan. He plays games with the bread scraps, making faces, shaping ears, pretending each loaf is a knight or a thief or a dragon. They laugh, not loud, not freely, but they laugh. And in that laughter there's something powerful, something defiant, something that says, we're still here. Because for all the rot and filth and cruelty outside their door, the family stays intact, just barely. But enough. There's no school, no books, no grand future ahead. But there's warmth in the hearth of bread on the table and hands that hold each other through the worst of it. Tomorrow Edmund will walk beside his father again. Mary will collect twigs. Isabel will trade thread for onions. And they'll survive another day. That's the only goal. And they're meeting it together. The city doesn't sleep, it simmers. Even after the bells stop ringing and the market square empties, life doesn't pause. It just changes shape. In the evening, the people who can afford to go home do. Those with warm hearths, decent roofs, and enough food for supper retreat indoors and bolt the doors behind them. The rest, the ones without walls thick enough to keep the cold out or coin enough to buy peace, stay on the streets. This is when the city starts whispering to itself. The torches sputter and flicker as the wind snakes through the alleys. Vendors who didn't sell enough linger too long at their stalls, trying to push off the last of their stock before it spoils overnight. Men pace corners offering God services for a fee. Rats grow bold, spilling out of gutters and darting between crates. And then come the ones with knives looking for coin or something to trade for it. For Thomas, this time of night is like walking a tightrope in fog. You know it's there, but you can't see the end, and you have to trust your feet won't betray you. Tonight he stayed too long. 3 loaves unsold. 1 already stale. The other 2 questionable by morning. He tells himself it's worth trying a new strategy, knocking on doors, offering the bread to taverns, poorhouses, or travellers near the southern gate. But the truth is he's stalling. He doesn't want to go home and say, we have only this, again. So he walks down the crooked lane behind the shoemaker's workshop, through the tight passage where the air always smells like mold and hot metal, past the square where a man once hung for stealing cheese. In his arms, the tray is lighter than it should be, but he carries it like it's made of gold. 1 fall, 1 splash of rain, and even what little he has becomes worthless. He approaches a known spot, a tiny alehouse near the edge of the quarter, run by a woman named Martha, who sometimes buys his old loaves to serve with broth or sop up spilled mead. She's not there. Her daughter answers the door, young, tired eyes darting like birds. Closed tonight, she says quickly before he even speaks. Please, just a halfpenny each. Father's sick, we've no money. And she shuts the door before her voice can crack. Thomas stands there for a long moment, staring at the old wood, the cracked stone, the space where a door once meant hope. Then he turns and walks. Behind him he hears something fall, a pan maybe, or a body. He doesn't go back. Instead, he takes the long way home. The streets are nearly empty. The cold seeps into his skin, makes his joints feel like rusted hinges. His stomach growls, but he ignores it. Hunger is an old companion, now noisier than most, but mostly harmless if you don't listen too closely. He rounds a corner and nearly collides with 2 boys, street kids, no older than Edmund, maybe younger. One has a black eye, the other a cut lip. They look at him, then at the tray, then back at him. He nods. They run. Smart boys. Not everyone runs. 3 men lean against a wall near the Baker's Guild Hall. Not guild members, not city watch, just shadows with hands in pockets and eyes that never blink. Thomas crosses to the other side of the lane, keeps walking. One of them whistles. He walks faster. They don't follow. Tonight, by the time he reaches home, the sky has gone black. The moon hides behind clouds. His feet feel like stones strapped to his ankles. His throat is raw from breathing the cold. His fingers have lost sensation. He opens the door and steps inside. Agnes looks up immediately. She doesn't smile. Still two. He nods. She takes the tray, sets it down, and starts warming the stew. No words, just movement. The girls are asleep. Edmund is pretending not to be. Thomas sits beside him. You awake the whole time, he asks. Edmund nods. You should sleep. I tried. Too cold. Thomas gives him the driest loaf. The boy eats in silence, chewing slowly, blinking too often. Thomas wants to say something. Something fatherly. Wise, comforting. But all he says is, we'll try earlier tomorrow. Edmund nods again. Then will there be more? Thomas looks at the fire. At the pot of stew barely bubbling. At the thread spool stacked near Agnes's knees. At the cracked wall. At the roof that leaked last week. At his son who's too thin, too pale, and already halfway a man. We'll try, he says. Outside the wind picks up. They sleep in shifts. Not because they plan to, but because that's how it works. Agnes sleeps first, curled between the girl's arms protectively around them. Thomas dozes near the fire hand still on the tray, like someone might try to steal from it in the night. Edmund stays awake a little longer just in case. By morning the stale loaves are tougher, but still edible. Agnes uses one to thicken the stew. The other becomes breakfast. And the cycle begins again. The days blur together. Markets, rain inspections, shadows. A pattern of survival with no rhythm, no rest. But sometimes something breaks the pattern. One morning, the city wakes to news a nobleman's carriage was robbed outside the gate. The city guard is furious. The guilds are outraged. And in response, the mayor declares a crackdown on unregulated commerce. Which, of course, means street vendors. Officially, it's about safety. Unofficially, it's about control. Guards patrol the square in double force. Inspectors are out before breakfast. They demand paperwork that no vendor owns. They fine people for standing too close to doorways, for obstructing traffic, for endangering commerce. Thomas is fined for having loaves not properly labeled. When he asks what that means, the guard shrugs and says, "You'll find out when you pay." Helena's stall is overturned. Roderick is hauled away after arguing too loudly. Margaret hides in the alley behind the tanner's shop selling fish under a pile of rags. Edmund comes home with bruised ribs. A guard shoved him, said he was loitering with intent. Thomas doesn't ask what that means. He knows it doesn't mean anything. That night they eat soup made from nothing but onion skins and stale bread. And yet somehow they laugh. Because the fire catches just right. Because Mary tells a joke about the chickens unionizing. Because Isabel finds a beetle in the straw and names it Lord Crumbottom. Because even in the crushing weight of a system built to break them, they are still here. Still breathing. Still trying. The rules keep changing. The punishments grow harsher. The bread doesn't rise quite right. But they're not gone. And tomorrow, they'll be back in the square. Because they have to be. Because no one else will feed them. Because even when the city says no, they find a way to whisper yes. Disease doesn't knock in the medieval city. It kicks in the door and stays as long as it likes. No warning, no preparation, no sympathy. One day the marketplace hums with shouting and bartering, and the next it's silent, emptied by fear more quickly than by soldiers. And when disease arrives, the people who feel it first aren't the noblemen in their walled courtyards or the priests behind cathedral doors. It's the street vendors, always the vendors. They are by design exposed. They handle food with unwashed hands, exchange coins touched by hundreds of others, breathe the breath of strangers, stand in streets thick with filth and flies. When illness comes, it hits them first, hits them hardest, and hits them longest. Thomas remembers the last plague. He doesn't talk about it, but he remembers. The summer of that year had been hot, too hot. The fish turned sour before midday, the bread crumbled under the weight of its own crust. Dogs roamed in packs. The river stank. And then one by one the stalls began to disappear. Margaret was the first to fall ill. She tried to keep selling, wrapping a cloth over her mouth and insisting it was just the heat. But her hands shook, her voice cracked, and then she stopped coming altogether. Within a week, the boy who sold candles was gone. So was the old woman with the bent back who always sang to herself while arranging mushrooms. The market shrank like a puddle in the sun. People stopped buying. Not because they weren't hungry, but because they were terrified. Every transaction felt like a gamble. Every breath was a wager. Even Thomas considered staying home, but he didn't, because the flour was already bought, because the children were already hungry, because there was no other plan. He sold fewer loaves each day, sometimes none, but he showed up every morning. Until one morning, the guards arrived with clubs and masks and told him no more. The marketplace was shut, not officially, but no one went. The risk was too high. Now, a few years later, the memories linger like rot in the corners of his mind. So when the coughing starts again, not in his own home, but around town, he feels it in his bones. This time it starts near the river. Someone says it's just a bad winter chill. But that's how it always starts. A neighbor dies, then a child, then the miller's wife. The market tightens. People stand farther apart. Voices drop. Loaves are examined more closely. Coins are handled with the tips of fingers, then wiped on sleeves. And still Thomas bakes. Still he sells. Still he walks the streets each morning with a tray full of risk and hope. Agnes begins boiling water for everything, for dishes, for hands, for washing the chicken's feet. She crushes herbs and mixes them with vinegar, dabs it behind the children's ears under their noses. It doesn't help. It never really helps. But it feels like doing something. And that has its own power. Mary starts coughing one night. Just once. But it's enough to make everyone sit up. Agnes holds her for hours, not moving, just listening for breath. Thomas sits by the fire, gripping the wooden tray like it might float them away from all of this. In the morning, the cough is gone. But they know the fear now. They've touched it, tasted it. It will stay. Days pass. Fewer vendors show up in the square. The guards begin patrolling again for order, they say, but really it's to keep the sick from congregating. Thomas begins selling in side streets near back doors. Quiet exchanges, whispered transactions. Helena disappears for 3 days. When she returns, her face is pale and her basket nearly empty. Brother died, she says simply. I still have to sell. Margaret looks thinner. Her fish are fewer. She says nothing about where she's been. Everyone looks at each other differently now, like they might vanish mid-sentence. One morning, Thomas feels dizzy. Just for a moment. Just a blink. He blames it on sleep, on hunger, on carrying too much weight. But Agnes notices. And that night, she doesn't sleep. Neither does he. They both lie there, staring at the rafters, listening to the soft breathing of their children, counting coughs that don't come. Because in the medieval world, illness isn't just about health. It's about economics. If Thomas gets sick, they lose everything. No income, no bread, no eggs sold, no thread spun, no stew made. And no one helps. There is no charity for people like them. The church gives sermons about compassion, but the pews are filled with those who would rather clutch their purses than loosen them. The city promises protection, but that protection ends at the marketplace gates. There are hospitals, yes, but not the kind we imagine today. More like places to die slowly and out of sight. People like Thomas don't go there. They stay home. They wrap themselves in cloth, drink whatever herbs they can find, and hope their bodies are too stubborn to give in. And if they die, they are buried without names. No tombstone, no prayer, no record. Just a hole, a shovel, a few coins if someone remembers. Agnes knows this, so she prepares. Quietly. She hides away some flour in a cloth bag. She stashes dried herbs near the hearth. She whispers prayers over each child at night. And she watches Thomas with eyes that see too much. Maybe you shouldn't sell tomorrow, she says one night. I have to, he answers. She doesn't argue, because she knows. The plague doesn't care about effort, or dignity, or fear. But bread still needs to be sold, and families still need to eat. One day a new face appears in the square. A woman older than Agnes, with a face line like riverbank clay. She doesn't speak, just sets down a tray of wilted greens and stares straight ahead. No one buys. No one speaks to her. But Thomas watches, because he's seen that look before. The look of someone who buried someone else, and came back anyway. The market gets quieter with each passing day, but it doesn't stop. It never truly stops. Because even when half the stalls are empty and the guards pace like wolves, and every cough feels like a death sentence, someone is still hungry. And someone still has something to sell. And someone like Thomas still believes that one more loaf might be enough to carry them to next week. Or at least to tomorrow. And sometimes that's all survival is. A series of tiny, fragile tomorrows. Strung together like beads on a frayed string. Each one bought with sweat and silence. And just enough hope to keep going. Hope doesn't come in grand gestures for people like Thomas. It doesn't arrive wrapped in parchment or carried by noblemen on horseback. It comes, if it comes at all, in the form of a halfpenny more than expected. A loaf that doesn't go stale before sunset. A day without rain or rats or shouting. But most of the time, hope is a lie the poor tell themselves to get out of bed. Still, some days something shifts. Something small, something unexpected. One spring morning, one of the first truly warm days of the year, Thomas arrives at the market to find a commotion near the fountain. A traveller by the look of his clothes. Clean boots, soft gloves, a coin purse that's heavier than his body language suggests. He's surrounded by vendors all eager to sell something, anything, to a man who clearly doesn't belong here. Most customers are locals. This one's different. Probably here for business or pleasure or both. But he's hungry and curious. Thomas watches from a distance, not expecting anything. Then without warning, the man walks over to him. "You the baker?" he asks. Thomas blinks. I sell bread." The man picks up a loaf, turns it over. It's ugly. Thomas doesn't answer, but it smells good. Thomas nods. It is. Coarse grain rye, a bit of barley. No wheat. Too dear. The man shrugs. "I like rye." He tosses Thomas a coin. A silver one. Too much. Thomas stares. "It's only a penny." Consider the rest. Encouragement. And with that, the man walks away, biting into the loaf like it's a festival treat. Thomas doesn't move for a full minute. When he does, he tucks the coin deep into his tunic. Away from thieves, away from inspectors, away from even Agnes. He'll show her later, at home, in private, after dinner, because moments like this are rare, too rare to risk. He sells out early that day. Every loaf, even the smaller ones. People seem lighter somehow. Maybe it's the weather. Maybe it's the memory of winter finally fading. Maybe it's just the power of one man spending a little more than expected. But for once, Thomas walks home with a tray that's not only empty, but clean. Agnes notices immediately. "You sold everything." He nods, smiles, hands her the silver coin. She holds it like it's made of glass. "I don't know what to say," she whispers. "Say we can buy wheat flour next week." She does. That night they eat real food. Not just stew, not just boiled scraps, but food with taste, texture, heat, bread that Thomas doesn't stretch with chalk or ash. The children smile more. Laugh louder. Even Edmund lets his guard down long enough to joke about the chickens planning a rebellion. They go to sleep warm, full, and most dangerously just a little hopeful. But hope is fragile, and the city doesn't like fragile things. 2 days later, the guild cracks down again. A notice is nailed to the market gate. All bread sellers must register with the Bakers' Guild or cease operations. There is no signature, no explanation. Just that. The next morning, Thomas sees a man hauled from his stall by 2 guards. Bread scattered, a child crying nearby. No one helps. The other vendors watch and then return to selling. Because what else can they do? Guild membership costs more than Thomas could afford in 3 lifetimes. You need sponsors, you need gold, you need bloodline. And even then they might say no. Still, he shows up the next morning, just later than usual, just quieter. He sets up in the alley behind the cooper's shop. Not ideal, less traffic, but safer. The customers find him anyway. Not all, but some. The woman with the broken sandals who always buys half a loaf. The boy who trades carrots for crust. Even a clerk from the scribe's office who pretends not to know him but always pays in exact coin. Word spreads quickly among the poor. Thomas is still selling. Just turn left after the dye shop. It's like a secret market within the market. Not legal, not safe, but necessary. Thomas sells fewer loaves now. But the people who come, they're loyal. One woman brings him a candle homemade just to say thank you. Another leaves a prayer charm on his tray. A little wooden figure, a saint he doesn't recognize. He carries it in his pouch now. Not because he believes, but because belief is sometimes easier than fear. Agnes starts sewing again. Someone in the merchant district heard about her thread. Small commissions, not much, but enough. Isobel helps. Her fingers nimble, her concentration sharp. She doesn't complain when the needle pricks her. She just sucks the blood from her fingertip and keeps going. Mary starts drawing in the dust. Shapes mostly, sometimes faces. Edmund keeps watch. One afternoon, he warns Thomas just in time. A guild enforcer turns the corner, sees the stall, sees the bread, and just before he can shout, Thomas is gone. Vanished into the shadows like he was never there. The bread, Edmund carried it around the block in a sack. They sell it on a stoop later, piece by piece. That night, Agnes laughs for the first time in weeks. "You're teaching him too well," she says. Thomas smiles, "Oh, not well enough." They go to sleep with full bellies and aching muscles. But they go to sleep. Then without warning, another change. A wealthy man dies. A noble. He was young, strong, healthy, but he caught something no one knows what. A fever, a cough, gone in 2 days. Now the city panics. Guards block the market entrances. Officials sweep through the streets barking orders about sanitation and public safety. A new decree appears overnight. Non-licensed vendors are hereby prohibited from public trade until further notice. There is no date, no explanation. Just a seal, a signature, and the unspoken threat of punishment. The next morning, the market is half empty. Some vendors risk it, set up in the shadows, move quickly, speak softly. Others stay home. Thomas waits. Just outside the square, tray in hand, watching. Edmund tugs his sleeve. "Let's go. We need to sell. They'll see us." "I know." He moves forward, sets down his tray, unwraps the cloth, holds his breath, and begins. Bread fresh from the fire. No one stops him. Not yet. Not today. He sells 1 loaf, then another, then nothing for an hour. Then a woman buys 3. He keeps going. When the guards pass, he pretends not to notice. When they glance his way, he nods respectfully. When they move on, he exhales. At the end of the day, he's sold 5. It's not everything, but it's enough. Enough to return home with coin. Enough to buy more flour. Enough to hope quietly. Because hope, as dangerous as it is also necessary. It's the spark in the ash, the thread in the needle, the crust that holds the stew. And Thomas, standing there, in the shadow of a broken guild system and a cracked city wall, decides that as long as he can walk, as long as he can knead, as long as he can sell, he will. Even if no one remembers his name, even if he vanishes tomorrow, because he has bread, and a family, and a street. And that somehow is enough. Most people think the line between survival and ruin is wide, a gradual slope you can see coming, a descent you can prepare for. But Thomas knows better. That line is razor thin, invisible until you're already bleeding. And in the world of medieval street vendors, it doesn't take war or famine to ruin you. Sometimes all it takes is 1 bad week, 1 broken oven, 1 crooked guard. Tonight the family eats slowly. The stew is thinner than usual, the bread made from a mix of flour and things that aren't really food, acorns, chalk ground seed husks. It's not flavor that matters but mass. Something to fill the belly. Something to muffle the growling inside long enough to sleep. The silver coin from the traveler is long gone. Wheat flour is a luxury again. Agnes traded the last of their spun thread for cabbage and a hunk of dry cheese. It smelled sour, but no one complained. Thomas hasn't slept well in days. His legs cramp at night. His arms ache from holding the tray. And worst of all, his mind runs in circles. He lies awake long after the fire dims, listening to the sounds outside, the soft feet of cats chasing rats, the clatter of distant boots, the cry of a woman 2 houses down. He's learned to tell the difference between a drunken brawl and a real fight. The difference between laughter and madness. And lately, there's been a new sound, the murmur of discontent. The vendors are angry. Not just tired, not just hungry. Angry. They talk in whispers, behind stalls, under blankets, in taverns if they can afford a drink. Too many taxes. No permits again. They want us to starve. It started with Helena, normally quiet all business. But one morning, after being fined for the 3rd time in a week, she snapped. "I pay to breathe in this square," she said, throwing a bruised apple at a passing official. "Next they'll charge me for coughing." The apple missed. The fine did not. But her words stuck. Other vendors started muttering, then talking, then gathering. Margaret, always the last to speak, was the one who asked the real question. "What if we just didn't pay?" Thomas was there when she said it. He didn't respond. Because he knew what that would mean. Defiance in their world wasn't noble, it was dangerous, deadly. The guilds held the courts, the guards held the weapons, and the vendors. They held nothing but baskets and hope. But hope can ferment, like forgotten fruit in the back of a cart. Sweet at first, then sharp, then explosive. One vendor, someone Thomas didn't know, started scrolling messages in charcoal on walls. "We feed the city. Let them pay us." Another drew symbols in chalk near the fountain, a loaf with a crown above it. It's all childish, really. Silly, except it isn't. Because people stop and read. Because the guards begin watching. And because a few loaves start going missing, not stolen by the hungry, but smashed, trampled, left behind as if to send a message. a message no one dares speak aloud. Thomas doesn't participate, not because he disagrees, but because he has a family, and a family changes everything. Still he listens. He watches, and he wonders, what would it take for him to fight? The answer comes sooner than he expects. One morning, Edmund doesn't come home. He was sent to trade thread for onions, a simple errand. He knew the route, knew the shop, knew the shortcuts. But night falls and there's no sign of him. Agnes doesn't panic at first. Then she does. Thomas checks the market, the alleyways, the back streets. He talks to every vendor, every shopkeeper, every child selling kindling. Nothing, until a boy with soot-streaked cheeks says the guards grabbed someone by the dye shop. Young, brown tunic. Thought he was stealing. Thomas runs. He finds Edmund at the edge of the square, sitting on a crate, arms crossed, eyes puffy. There's a bruise on his cheek. One guard leans against a wall board. Another stands nearby, arms folded. He was loitering, the first says. Thomas doesn't argue. He just takes Edmund by the hand and walks away. At home, Agnes holds her son like he's been gone for years. He doesn't speak. Not until later. They said I don't belong here, he whispers. Thomas says nothing. Because what is there to say? He doesn't belong anywhere. Not legally, not politically, not economically. Street vendors live in a liminal space used by the city but not protected by it. Useful until they're inconvenient. Needed until they speak. That night, Thomas doesn't sleep. He stares at the fire and listens to the city breathe. The next morning, he doesn't go to the square. He goes to the fountain instead and waits. One by one, the others come. Helena, Margaret, a few others. No signs, no shouting, just presence. The guards don't react at first. They're used to the vendors gathering, usually for gossip, for warmth, for survival. But this time no one sells. No one opens their basket. No one lays out cloth. They just stand. A silent wall of the city's lowest standing in the open. By noon a crowd has gathered. Not large, but watching. A guard approaches, says nothing, just looks, then walks away. Thomas breathes. Later they disperse. No one speaks of victory. There's no such thing. But something shifted. A silence was broken. That evening back at home, Thomas bakes. Not his usual batch. Just 3 loaves. All with wheat flour. A celebration maybe. A statement possibly. He eats with his family. Mary tells a story about a chicken who outsmarted a merchant. Isabel laughs so hard she drops her spoon. Edmund smiles, but only a little. Agnes watches Thomas closely. Do you think it's safe, she asks. He doesn't answer. Because it's never been safe. Not once. But it's still worth doing. Because sometimes even the smallest people need to take up space. Even if that space is only one corner of a filthy market square. Even if that space is rented by the hour and taxed by the breath. Even if that space is earned with bruises. They go to bed full. That's enough for now. And tomorrow, they'll stand again. And maybe they won't be alone. Morning again. The city wakes like it always does, unevenly and with more groans than grace. Somewhere a bell tolls half-heartedly. Dogs bark. A cart screeches over stones, a window slams, water splashes, somewhere someone retches into a gutter. Thomas hears it all from the doorway of his home tray and hand-wrapped loaves stacked neatly and precisely habit-formed from thousands of repetitions. He doesn't even think about it anymore. His hands just move, folding, cloth-testing, crust-tucking corners. But this morning is different. Not because of the weather, not because of a holiday, not because he has more bread or better ingredients. No, it's something else. Something he can't name. The air feels heavier, and yet the city is lighter somehow. He walks slowly today. Not because he's tired though he is, but because he's watching. Paying attention to everything, the faces in the windows, the color of the sky, the sound of the fountain in the distance. Like he's memorizing it all just in case. At the edge of the marketplace he stops. There's a new sign posted on the wall, nailed with fresh wood and trembling parchment. He reads the first few words, by order of the city, but doesn't finish. He doesn't need to. He already knows what it says. Something about permits, something about fines, something about unauthorized commerce, something about removal. He walks past it. The vendors are already there. Fewer than before, but still there. Helena is setting up apples, fewer than usual but polished. Margaret has fish again, small but fresh enough. A few others nod at Thomas as he passes. No one says anything about the sign. They've seen 100 signs like it. Some worse, some more specific. None of them made anything better. Thomas sets up. Not in his old spot, but closer to the fountain today. No one stops him. Yet, Edmund arrives soon after carrying a pouch of coins from a morning errand. He doesn't speak either, just stands beside his father, quiet alert. By mid-morning people come. Not in droves, not as many as before, but they come. And they buy bread, apples, fish, whatever they can. Not because it's safe, not because it's legal, because it's there, because they need it. And because the vendors, the ones who haven't been crushed yet, are still showing up, still standing, still selling, still living. There's power in that, not loud power. Not the kind that sits in palaces or passes laws or commands armies, but the quiet power of people who refuse to go away. People who show up day after day with trays and baskets and bruised knees and tired hands. People who whisper to each other, "Did you hear Helena stood her ground yesterday?" Or "Margaret didn't flinch when the guard walked past," or "Thomas sold out by midday." That's how movements begin, not with speeches, but with survival. The guard shows up at noon, same man as always. He walks the square slowly, deliberately, hands behind his back, chin raised. He doesn't say anything, doesn't need to. Everyone sees him, everyone tenses, but no one moves. He walks past Thomas. Their eyes meet. Thomas nods. The guard pauses, then moves on. Thomas doesn't exhale until the man turns the corner. But he doesn't run. He doesn't pack up. He just stays. Edmund grins. "I thought he was going to say something." "Me too," Thomas replies. But he didn't. No, he didn't. Another loaf sold. Another coin earned. The afternoon light shifts golden and soft. A woman passes by with a baby strapped to her back. She looks at the bread, then her coin pouch, then the bread again. Thomas doesn't say a word. He just hands her half a loaf. She hesitates, then nods and walks on. She'll come back, he knows. Or maybe she won't. But the gesture matters. Later, Margaret walks over with a bit of salted fish wrapped in cloth. "For dinner," she says. "I can't." "You can." She leaves it on the crate and walks away. That night, Thomas brings the fish home like treasure. Agnes unwraps it carefully, smells it, smiles. Isabel dances. Mary claps. Edmund says nothing, but his eyes shine. They eat together, bread and fish and boiled roots, nothing grand, but real, full. Afterward, they sit in the quiet. The fire crackles. The city mutters beyond the walls. A storm brews far in the distance, but doesn't come. Thomas closes his eyes and listens to the breathing of his children, to the rhythm of a house still intact, to the echo of footsteps in the street, and to the promise of tomorrow. Because despite everything, despite the guards and guilds and filth and fear, they're still here. Not rich, not safe, not powerful, but present, alive, holding on to what little they have with the kind of strength that doesn't get carved into monuments or written in books, but the kind that endures, the kind that carries fire across years, the kind that teaches a child to knead dough or spin thread or watch a street corner like it holds the future. The kind that keeps bread baking even when the oven's broken and the flour's half sawdust and the law says no. It's not glorious, but it's real. And sometimes that's enough. So if you're still with me, thank you. Tonight we walked with Thomas through the filth-slick streets of a medieval city, past guards and guilds and rain-soaked alleys. We watched him knead bread with hands that never rested. We stood beside his children as they learned to barter and fear in equal measure. We listened to vendors whisper defiance through cracked lips, and we heard silence used as a kind of quiet protest. These people, these vendors, they rarely made it into history books. They didn't build cathedrals or fight in wars or pen great letters, but they did something just as hard. They endured. They fed the cities, not in ballads, but in crusts, in crumbs, in mornings that began long before sunrise. They shaped markets with baskets and bruises. And though the world rarely thanked them, they built the scaffolding for something bigger, for survival, for change. Their stories might be forgotten, but their strength lives in every hand that reaches for daily bread, in every whisper of "we're still here." To rest now, knowing that even in the hardest times, someone somewhere found a way to carry on. Someone stood at a street corner holding bread like it was hope, and they passed it forward, even to us,